Okay.
All right, so for undocumented people who are victims of domestic violence, there are actually a couple of different things that we can look at to get them on the pathway to residency and then on the pathway to citizenship. And the two that we're going to look at today are U visa and Vawa. Don't know how familiar you are with immigration law, so
I'm not familiar at all. So
okay. So there are a couple of different pathways that people become citizens by or become residents by. Those of us who were born here in the United States, we don't really have any reason to delve into this typically, but we get our citizenship by birth. And that's not actually the case in other countries. Other countries don't always have right of citizenship by birth. So there are multiple pathways to get to citizenship. The ones that we hear all the time are going to be either having a family member that files a petition for you, whether it's a spouse or a parent or a sibling, or asylum. People who win asylum in the US are then later eligible to apply for residency and are then later eligible to become citizens.
Okay.
But the two that we're talking about today are U visa and Vawa. U visa is a type of permission to enter and remain in the United States that later on allows you to apply for residency. And Vawa is from legislation called the Violence Against Women Act, which recognizes that there were a lot of men who were bringing women to the United States as spouses and then mistreating those women and holding their ability to apply for their residency over their head. Like, well, you can't become a resident, you're illegal in this country unless you do what I say.
Right.
And so VAWA allows people to self-petition if you have an abusive spouse. Two little known things about VAWA is it doesn't only apply to women, it also applies to men and people who don't identify as either gender. And it also applies to abuse from a parent or a child. So if you are an undocumented person and you're being abused by your parent or your child, then you can use VAWA as well.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, the one other thing that we're not really going to talk about today that you might see people in the situation is a T visa. It's a trafficking visa. So if that person was brought to the United States for the purpose of exploitation of their labor or their body sexually, that's another way that they can maintain or apply for residency.
Okay.
And that even applies to domestic labor. So people don't think of this often. They think of like heavy outdoor labor. But if you were brought to the United States because you were meant to work as somebody's nanny, and your family never pays you, they take your passport away, and they don't allow you to interact with people, that's also trafficking.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna move forward here. Okay, why isn't it let me? Oh, okay, I'm having some issue clicking forward in the presentation.
Oh, I hate that.
Let me stop. Is it because I'm recording?
I hate Zoom. It messes up my computer.
Okay, I'm gonna stop share and then I'm gonna reshare and see if that's what was giving me any grief.
Okay.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, good.
All right, so we'll do U visa first because they do have different requirements. So for a U visa, you have to have been the victim of a particular crime. So one of those crimes that qualifies is domestic violence. Another crime that qualifies is felony assault. Stalking, kidnapping, those qualify for U visa. What doesn't qualify for U visa? Robbery. A lot of times people will come with an element of assault that includes a robbery. And if the police only write it on their report as a robbery and don't charge it as an assault, unfortunately, it's not going to qualify for U visa.
Okay.
If the police officers write it as a simple assault, then there's a chance it might be rejected if you apply for U visa. Now, if they write it as a simple assault, but the description includes elements that we can argue were a felony assault, then that's fine. We might be able to go ahead. But if they write it as a simple assault and then the police report says the person pushed me or they grabbed me, then it might not be severe enough for the decision maker to conclude that it meets U visa requirements.
Why do you think that is? I know that obviously there's levels to assault, but assault is assault, right?
So in their minds, the legislators who made this law thought that people might assist each other by being an accomplice in a minor issue to help someone obtain residency. So they wanted to make sure that it was a serious crime before someone could apply for it. Because legislators don't live in reality, they would think something like that.
Okay, I guess.
So the hardest part about a U visa is that the person has to cooperate with the police or the prosecutors in order to get the signature for the first step of the U visa. So this becomes really difficult a lot of times with our domestic violence cases because after they go through the initial incident, they don't want to go to court really, or they don't really want the other person to get in trouble. In our cases with undocumented people, they sometimes feel like the potential consequence is too severe. They don't want their partner, who also might be undocumented, to face deportation, or they fear there might be some repercussions for themselves because they're undocumented. So they don't want to follow up with the police and prosecutors. But if they refuse to testify when called, or if they refuse to answer the police phone calls when they want more information, then it'll be very difficult for us to turn around to the police and say, hey, can you sign the certification for a U visa? They're not likely to sign it if the person didn't cooperate.
Okay.
So, and that's different than Vawa. So, right now we'll just talk about what U visa requires. And it can be signed, that certification that's required can be signed by the police or prosecutor. So if you have a situation where the person cooperated with one party but not the other, you might be able to get a signature from one. And that does happen sometimes. Sometimes the people will go to court when they're required to, but they are afraid to talk to the police. They don't want to. So we can go straight to the prosecutor and ask for a signature where the police might not have been willing to sign it.
Okay.
Or the other way, the person didn't show up in court, but they did cooperate with the police. We can ask the police for a signature. And if the officer doesn't investigate whether or not the person showed up in court, then we can get the signature.
Okay.
I have had occasions where a police officer will actually write a statement explaining why they refuse to sign. And even when we don't agree with those, it's really hard to fight against, because I just realized I spelled prerequisites wrong. Because, excuse me for that.
Lord,
They operate as like a unit a lot of times. And so if one officer refuses to sign, it's kind of difficult to go to the captain, or go to someone above them and request it. In one particular case, I had a police officer write me a statement saying, I've been to this house 3 times and this person refuses to end the relationship. And for that reason, I'm not signing it. Now, I wrote them back the best letter I've ever written in my life, explaining why that was wholly inappropriate. And even though the captain agreed with me, he was like, this letter should never been written, he still wouldn't sign off on the U visa, because he was like, look, the requirement is that the person cooperate with us, and they didn't cooperate with us. Now, I agree that what my officer wrote to you was inappropriate, but I still can't sign it.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So what happened in that situation? Nothing?
In that situation, there wasn't anything else that we can do U visa related to assist them. Only the police department who responds to the call can sign off on the request. And in that case, the office made it very clear that they were not willing to sign off on it.
Okay.
So we had to tell them, we're very sorry, we can't get you through the first step.
That's terrible.
Yeah. So I should have started with this slide actually. So for U visa, it's a 3-step process in order to get to residency. The first step is what we just discussed. The certification has to be signed by either the police or the prosecutor. Once we get that signature, it's only good for 90 days. So within 90 days of that signature, the person has to apply for a U visa directly with immigration. The things that stop a person from applying directly with immigration are sometimes the costs that's involved with it. Even if you don't have an attorney, the application fees are pretty expensive. And if the person initially entered the US without permission, there's a separate waiver that they have to apply for that's also expensive. It's $930.
Oh my gosh.
So from step 1, what I tell people is, once we get to step 2, these are going to be the fees that are involved. We need to be prepared for that once we get your certification so that, you're not spending that 90 days just trying to get the money together.
Oh my
Okay.
God.
And the only thing I think that Bethany House would truly, really be concerned about is getting people through step 1. So when you have people show up and they've already filed a police report, then you want to help encourage them to go through with cooperating with the police or prosecutors. And if you have people showed up and they haven't yet filed a police report, then supporting them to say, yes, even though you're undocumented, you can still file this report. The police do not have authority to deport them. So there's no risk that by filing a report that they're going to be deported or harmed or anything like that. They're not going to be arrested for filing a police report. So I think that's more where Bethany comes into place, or other domestic violence resources. But I just want you to know the whole process because they might ask questions about it. Once someone's U visa status is granted, there's a waiting period. Because these visas are allocated by Congress, there's only a certain number of them allotted every year. So the waiting period right now is about 3 years before the person will actually be able to apply for residency. But during that time, between step 2 and 3, while they're waiting, they can get a work permit, they can get a travel permit, and then every so often they just have to check the visa bulletin to see whether or not a visa is available for their date. There's a date that's on their U visa, and once it's available for their date, then they can apply for residency.
Okay.
Okay, so that was a lot. Any questions about that part?
No.
Okay.
No. Doing well.
All right, perfect. All right, so now we're going to compare U visa to Vawa. So for Vawa, it's not gender exclusive like U visa. U visa applies to abuse by a US citizen or resident spouse, child, or parent. So this is different from U visa. For a U visa, it doesn't matter who the aggressor is, who the defendant or perpetrator is. But for Vawa, it has to be a United States citizen or resident spouse, child, or parent. And they have to have been legally married. I'm sure you've run into this before, where people refer to someone as their spouse because they've lived together for so many years. If they were not legally married, it does not qualify for Vawa.
Oh, okay. So see, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Or if they were divorced less than 2 years ago, they can still apply for Vawa. So yeah, so common law marriage is not going to count for purposes of Vawa.
Now, is that still a thing? Common law marriage?
In some states, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in some states it is. And so also Vawa does not require that a police report have ever been filed, which gives some leeway to people in this situation. They only require some kind of other evidence of abuse. That other evidence could be the person's own credible statement about the abuse that occurred, photos, medical records, statements from their friends, statements from that other person's friends or family member. I've had cases where the mother was able to get a statement from the ex-wife and stepchild as to the abuse that was perpetrated by the husband. So those are allowed. I've also had medical reports where the physician suspected that there was some abuse occurring at home and documented it, even though the person denied it when they went in for the appointment. So those can be used as evidence of abuse as well.
Oh, okay.
So So we're just going to do some examples, some situations, so you can kind of see what the differences are between U visa or VAWA and which one will be better for the person.
Okay.
MP is an undocumented woman from Haiti. She arrived at Bethany House with bruises all over her body. She stated that her husband, who's a US citizen, had kicked her out of the home. She mentioned that she called the police on 3 occasions, but on each occasion, she refused to speak to the officers when they arrived. So what do you think would be better for her, U visa or what? And the things that are important to know is her husband is a US citizen, and she did not go through with filing police reports. So the better option for her would be
VAWA?
exactly. She wouldn't be able to most likely wouldn't be able to get a certification from the police officers because she didn't cooperate with them. So VAWA would be the best option for her.
Okay.
Okay. SK is an undocumented transgender woman from Cameroon. She lived with a long-term partner who repeatedly abused and mistreated her over the course of 3 years. She has statements from friends who witnessed the abuse. She filed a police report and is now at Bethany House seeking shelter. VAWA or U visa?
So that would be the U visa.
That's going to be U visa because this long-term partner was not a spouse, not a legal spouse.
Okay. Okay.
But this person did cooperate with the police and file a report. So they're going to be most likely eligible for a U visa. SK is also going to be eligible for asylum on the basis of being a transgender woman from Cameroon. So you can always tell a person, like, I know that you're eligible for a U visa and we can support you through, doing what you need to do to maintain contact with the police. But there are also some options immigration wise that you are eligible for, and you definitely need to speak to an immigration attorney to explore what those other options are in comparison to U visa.
Okay.
All right. There are some complicating factors for U visa and VAWA. So if the person was previously requested to appear in immigration court, but they did not, they are still eligible, even though they have a removal order or in absentia order. But the steps in order to get VAWA or U visa are going to be different because they have that removal order. So they still can do it, but it's something that they definitely want to work with an attorney on, as opposed to when people try to file on their own, because the steps required are different.
Okay.
If the person themselves has a criminal history, that can be a complicating factor. Typically in abusive relationships, there might be both partners have some charges against them. This can usually be explained. The only situation I've had where it was just kind of hopeless was a woman who also had child abuse charges.
Oh, goodness.
Now, I understood from putting the timeline together, and the children were actually removed from her as well. I understood by putting the timeline together that the abuse that was happening against the children was related to the abuse that was being perpetrated against her.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that she was named in the complaint by the government as the abuser is because she was the only parent who was in the home when they came.
Okay.
The other parent would have been charged as well as if he was there.
Okay.
But the government was unforgiving about it. And so they denied her U visa. So she got the certification, but in the step 2, her U visa was denied because of her own criminal history.
Now, when that happens, it's done and over. That's it.
There's an opportunity to appeal if you feel like their decision was wrong and you want a higher authority to review it. But in this case, I did tell her from the very beginning, because of not just the charge, but because of the allegations that were made that supported the charge, and because the children were removed from her with no reunification.
Oh, no.
That it was going to be very difficult.
Oh, yeah, that's tough. So she had to go home?
So her U visa was denied. After that, I didn't have any further contact with her, so I'm not sure if she wasn't detained, so she wasn't deported immediately. But if she was to have some interaction with the police in the future, then most likely she would be deported.
Okay. Now, may I ask a question in regards to deportation? I'm not very clear on how that occurs. So you say, let's say something happened, and they find out that, she's undocumented. Do they arrest you and hold you and then send you back? Or how do they go about that process?
Yeah, so it depends on exactly what your immigration history was. With her, she already had a removal order, and now she has these serious criminal charges, which, if you look at them just on face, without any context, are really horrible.
Oh,
And so in her situation, she would be detained by local police, turned over to immigration authorities, INS, and then she would be removed with no further ceremony. There would be no further hearings about it because she already has a removal order and she has serious criminal history.
oh, wow. So,
But if you have someone who's detained who didn't have any prior criminal history, didn't have any prior immigration history, they're going to have an opportunity to go before a judge and establish some pathway that they could stay in the United States. So let's say you have someone who comes in and you try to get a U visa for them, but it fails for some reason. And they have an interaction later on with the police and they're arrested, turned over to immigration authorities, turned over to ICE. ICE would take them and schedule for them to go before a judge. And at that point, they can say, I'm going to try my U visa again, or I'm going to apply for asylum. And the judge will give them an opportunity to do that. The judge will decide whether they have to remain detained during that process, or if they have an opportunity to pay a bond and then appear in court periodically while they go through it. It's up to the judge's discretion whether or not they believe the person is a danger to society, and if the person is likely to appear in court, whether or not they choose to have the person file their case while they're detained, or they offer them a bond.
okay.
Yeah, so it depends on their own prior history. Generally, ICE doesn't go after people unless they have some reason to be looking for them. The majority of time when people who have no history whatsoever get caught up is because they're just in a place where a raid just happens to be happening, wrong time, wrong place. Or if they bring some interaction with the police on them, driving without a license, DUI, are very common ways that people have interactions with police that lead to greater consequences.
Okay.
But if people can live in the United States for 20, 30 years undocumented, and if they just have no interaction with the police, they're not going to come looking for them.
Right. Which can be kind of difficult, like you said, driving.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled over myself.
Yeah.
So it just,
or if you do something simple that you just didn't know, was horrible. I had a poor little 20-year-old kid who bought some marijuana in DC and was driving to Virginia and got pulled over. Now he had a driver's license, but he was undocumented. And he didn't understand, he didn't conceptualize that, I'm driving out of one area where this is legal into another area where it's not.
Oh, so this was before it was legal in Virginia.
Yeah, so he got picked up for possession of marijuana, less than 20 grams. And then some other, there are some other things that happen. But yeah, there's these small things that people don't really understand can lead to very extreme consequences.
Right. And, honestly, I wouldn't have thought that would have been something serious.
Yeah. And it also depends on the officer that you're interacting with. A lot of officers would have been like, hey, you can't do that, and just let it slide.
Right.
But this particular officer went through the extreme of arresting him.
Oh, yeah. Some of them are definitely that way. That's the unfortunate part of it all.
Right. So another complicating factor is lack of continuous contact. So for the Vawa in particular, but also for U visa on both of them, let's say both of them. I shouldn't say that one's not important, but these have multiple steps and things that have to be done. And so if the person is not in continuous contact with the attorney who's handling the case or the volunteer who's handling the case for them, they can miss a step that's really detrimental. If they miss that 90-day period, you have to start all over from scratch and get the certification again. And a
Oh,
lot
good.
of officers will not re-sign. I've run into this issue before, where an officer said, they signed a certification for me that was from 2010. Okay, this was back when I started practicing. So at that point, it was like 5 years gone. The person didn't get in touch with me within the 90-day period to go on to step 2. When they finally got in touch with me years later, the police officer was like, no, I will not sign something that's 10 years old.
Oh. Even though he previously signed it himself?
Exactly.
So that's a little, I'm not sure. I know personally, I'm like, okay, I understand if someone else signed it, but if you signed it, then you know why you signed it.
Right.
Just
But they have complete and total discretion over that. Nobody can force them to do it. So whatever rules they make up, whatever their local rules are, that's what we have to abide by,
okay.
There's no process by which I can request he be forced to sign it.
Right.
So if the person is not in continuous contact with you, it can cause problems. Or if their visa comes available and they don't file within the time frame that's allotted, then it's gone. Somebody else takes that visa and their opportunity is gone.
Oh, goodness.
So they have to be told, you have to stay in contact with me. You have to update me when you change your phone number or change your address. It's very important.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last thing we already talked about, which is non-compliance with officers or prosecutors. What's happening more and more recently is that the officers will tell us they're willing to sign it, but not until the case is completed. So they're like, yes, the person has cooperated me on 2 occasions, but the case hasn't gone to trial yet, or the case hasn't gone to final disposition yet. And so until it gets to that point, I'm not going to sign off on it. And they'll just hold the request for certification. So if at some point during that process, the person decides they're no longer going to comply, then we can't get the signature.
Okay.
So that's, oh, now I've gotten stuck again.
Oh, no.
That's all right. Now I know what to do when it gets stuck like that. So we'll just go back here and do this again. Oh man, it didn't work out as good as it did the last time. I think.
Oh no, that went back.
Going backwards. I think that actually might be the last one. Let me see. Is that? Yep. That's why it's not moving, because that was the last one.
All right.
All right. So did you have any lingering questions or?
No, ma'am. You did a good job explaining. No, I don't have any questions. I'm not the person. Right. I wait. I'm always like, wait, I have an idea. What about this while you're doing? Hope I didn't.
Okay. So if it turns out that later on you do have a question, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a phone call. That's completely fine. Or the same thing for your friend who's going to watch later on. That's completely fine. I would love to be able to help more people who find themselves in these situations, because if they can find their independent way to obtain residency, that can also help cut down that likelihood that they go back to that abusive partner.
Right, absolutely. And I'm about an hour and a half away from Bethany, but there is a shelter here that I worked for in like 2014. And I was just sitting here thinking, we have a lot of Hispanic people in this area. And I'm positive that a lot of them are undocumented. And so it would probably be a good thing if they had some form of education, because I would guarantee you that they don't. A lot of people do not know this information or even where to start. I know we have a lady, she came to us, he kept her green card. And I had literally zero idea of where to start, how to research it. And then when you try to research it, the language is so confusing. Yes. I'm an attorney, and I'm like, holy smokes, I really don't know what to do. And luckily we had a individual Tiffany knew that was able to send me some information. And then we started, but we still messed some stuff up. And she had to keep going back because I've never had to do that before. So when we field, I think in general, not even just specifically a domestic violence shelter, but you should have some sort of idea on how to help someone in this situation or situations, right?
Right. Yeah. And so, you're welcome to send them my information. I could do a custom, they could send like certain questions. I could make a
Mhm.
custom presentation to help out what situations they typically see come in their doors.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Thank you so much for joining this morning. I appreciate you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, are you going to send me the recording
Yes.
for?
It
Okay,
takes, the last time I did a recording, it took a minute for my computer to actually process it. But as soon as I have it, I can email it directly to you. If you send me an email, so I have your direct email, I can send it directly to you, or I'll just send it to Tiffany.
oh yeah, you can send it to me. I'll send you
Okay.
I'll send an email to you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You do the same, ma'am. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye-bye.